The bell above the door chimed as Marcus stepped into his store, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and polish. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the rows of handcrafted shoes lining the shelves. He smiled, running his fingers along a pair of Oxfords he finished stitching just yesterday. This place was his pride and joy, a testament to years of hard work and a family legacy 3 generations strong. As he made his way to the back office, Marcus noticed a woman browsing near the front display. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer handbag screamed big spender, and he made a mental note to check on her once he put his things away. But something about her demeanor gave him pause. The way her eyes darted around the store, her lips pursed in a tight frown. She seemed uncomfortable. Marcus shrugged it off. It was probably nothing. He dealt with all types of customers over the years, and a little nervousness wasn't unusual when faced with the prospect of dropping serious cash on luxury footwear. He'd give her a few minutes to settle in before offering his assistance. Hanging up his jacket, Marcus heard the bell chime again. Curious, he peeked out from the office doorway. A young couple had entered, laughing as they admired a pair of strappy sandals. The blonde woman's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she watched them. Marcus frowned. Something definitely felt off. He was about to step out when his phone buzzed. A text from his sister flashed across the screen. "Don't forget Mom's birthday dinner tonight." Marcus groaned. He completely spaced on picking up a gift. Maybe he could duck out for a quick run to the florist down the street. Decision made. Marcus grabbed his wallet and headed for the door. He'd only be gone 10 minutes tops. As he passed the blonde woman, he flashed a friendly smile. "Let me know if you need any help when I get back," he said warmly. "I'm just stepping out for a moment." The woman's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Before Marcus could wonder about her odd reaction, he was out the door and jogging down the sidewalk. 15 minutes later, the florist had been busier than expected. Marcus returned with a beautiful bouquet of his mother's favorite lilies. As he approached the store, he noticed a commotion inside. His pace quickened, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. The scene that greeted him as he pushed open the door was nothing short of surreal. The blonde woman stood near the register, her face flushed an angry red as she gesticulated wildly. Beside her, looking thoroughly confused and more than a little annoyed, was a burly man in a security uniform. And there, in the center of it all, stood the young couple from earlier, their expressions a mixture of bewilderment and growing outrage. "I'm telling you," the blonde woman was saying, her voice shrill, "he doesn't belong here. I saw him come in and start touching everything. He's probably trying to case the place for a robbery." Marcus felt his jaw drop as he realized she was pointing at the young man of the couple, who happened to be black. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The woman's discomfort earlier, her strange reaction when he'd spoken to her. She'd assumed he was a potential thief, not the owner. For a moment, Marcus was frozen in disbelief. This kind of blatant racism wasn't something he often encountered in his upscale neighborhood. But as the security guard began to move towards the innocent couple, Marcus found his voice. "Excuse me," he said, his tone firm but calm. "What seems to be the problem here?" All eyes turned to him. The blonde woman's face lit up with relief. "Oh, thank goodness you're back," she exclaimed. "I was just explaining to the security guard about this suspicious-looking man." Marcus held up a hand, cutting her off. "Ma'am," he said, struggling to keep his anger in check, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He turned to the young couple, offering an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry about this. Please, feel free to continue shopping. Everything here is half off today, as my way of making up for this unpleasantness." The woman's mouth fell open in shock. But you can't." "I can," Marcus interrupted, his voice taking on an edge of steel. "And I will. This is my store, and I won't tolerate this kind of behavior here." The security guard, who had been watching the exchange with growing comprehension, cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm very sorry, sir," he said to Marcus. "We received a call about a potential shoplifter, but clearly there's been a mistake. I'll be on my way now." As the guard left, Marcus turned back to the blonde woman, who was now pale and trembling. "I think it's best if you leave as well," he said quietly. "And please don't come back unless you're prepared to treat all of my customers with respect." She fled without another word, the bell tinkling almost mockingly in her wake. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to center himself. He dealt with difficult customers before. But this was on another level entirely. The young couple approached him hesitantly. "Thank you," the woman said softly. "We didn't know what to do. It was all so ridiculous, we could hardly believe it was happening." Marcus nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I'm truly sorry you had to experience that," he said. "Please, let me show you some of our new arrivals. I think I have the perfect pair of dress shoes that would go wonderfully with that suit," he added, gesturing to the man. As they moved further into the store, Marcus couldn't shake the weight of what had just transpired. He built this business on quality craftsmanship and treating everyone who walked through that door with dignity. But clearly, there were still battles to be fought, even here, in this place he'd always considered a sanctuary. He watched as the young man tried on a pair of wingtips, admiring his reflection in the mirror. There was a resilience in his eyes, a quiet strength that spoke of similar encounters weathered in the past. Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. His store would be more than just a place to buy shoes. It would be a beacon of inclusivity, a small but significant stand against the prejudices that still plagued their society. The bell chimed again as a new customer entered. Marcus straightened his shoulders, plastered on a welcoming smile, and moved to greet them. There was work to be done, one pair of shoes, and one mind, at a time. As the day progressed, Marcus found himself mulling over the morning's incident. He helped customers with his usual warmth and expertise, but his mind kept drifting back to the shocked faces of the young couple, the indignant fury of the blonde woman. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered prejudice, but something about this particular encounter left him unsettled. During a lull in foot traffic, Marcus retreated to his office. He sank into his worn leather chair, fingers tracing the nameplate on his desk. Marcus Johnson, owner. His father had presented it to him on the day he'd taken over the family business, beaming with pride. Now, Marcus wondered what the old man would have made of today's events. A gentle knock interrupted his brooding. "Everything okay, boss?" It was Aisha, his longtime assistant manager. Her dark eyes were filled with concern as she lingered in the doorway. Marcus managed a wan smile. "Just thinking, that's all." He hesitated, then asked, "Did you hear about what happened this morning?" Aisha nodded, her expression grim. "Word travels fast. That security guard came back to apologize again, by the way. He seemed pretty shaken up." "Good," Marcus said, though he felt no real satisfaction. "Any sign of our, overzealous customer?" "Nope," Aisha replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "And if she knows what's good for her, she'll stay away." Marcus chuckled to spike himself. Aisha's fierce loyalty had been a constant source of comfort over the years. As she turned to leave, a thought struck him. "Hey, Aisha, have you ever? Has anything like this happened here before? When I wasn't around?" The pause before her answer told him everything. "Once or twice," she admitted quietly. "Nothing as blatant as today, but, yeah, there've been some comments, some looks." The knot in Marcus's stomach tightened. How could he have been so blind? He prided himself on creating a welcoming environment for everyone, but clearly, he'd missed some ugly undercurrents. "I should have told you," Aisha continued, guilt creeping into her voice. "But you always seemed so. I don't know of it all. Like nothing could touch you. I didn't want to burst that bubble." Marcus stood, crossing the room to place a hand on her shoulder. "You should never have to deal with that alone," he said firmly. "I'm sorry I didn't notice. That changes today." As Aisha left, Marcus's resolve solidified. He needed to do more than just run a successful business. He needed to make a statement. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of customers and shoe fittings. As closing time approached, Marcus found himself drawn to the window display. He'd always taken pride in his eye for design, carefully arranging each season's standout pieces to catch the attention of passers-by. Now, he saw it with fresh eyes. Row after row of gleaming leather, all beautiful, all expensive. But did it truly represent the diversity of his clientele, of the community he served? Marcus's mind began to race with ideas. What if he showcased local artists alongside the shoes, or partnered with up-and-coming designers from underrepresented backgrounds? Lost in thought, he almost missed the figure hovering just outside the store. It was the young man from that morning, peering in somewhat hesitantly. Marcus waved him inside with a warm smile. I hope you're not here to return those wingtips, he joked as the man approached. They looked pretty perfect on you. The customer, Marcus made a mental note to ask his name this time, shook his head. No, sir, I actually came to thank you again. And, well, to apologize. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Apologize. For what? The young man shifted uncomfortably. For not speaking up more. For letting that woman's accusations rattle me. I should have been stronger. A wave of sympathy washed over Marcus. How many times had he swallowed his own anger, his own hurt, in the face of prejudice? How often had he second-guessed his reactions, wondering if he should have done more, said more? You have nothing to apologize for, Marcus said firmly. The fault lies entirely with her, not you. But I appreciate you coming back. I'm Marcus, by the way. I don't think we were properly introduced earlier. Marcus stood, crossing the room to place a hand on her shoulder. You should never have to deal with that alone, he said firmly. I'm sorry I didn't notice. That changes today. As Aisha left, Marcus's resolve solidified. He needed to do more than just run a successful business. He needed to make a statement. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of customers and shoe fittings. As closing time approached, Marcus found himself drawn to the window display. He'd always taken pride in his eye for design, carefully arranging each season's standout pieces to catch the attention of passers-by. Now, he saw it with fresh eyes. Row after row of gleaming leather, all beautiful, all expensive. But did it truly represent the diversity of his clientele, of the community he served? Marcus's mind began to race with ideas. What if he showcased local artists alongside the shoes? Or partnered with up-and-coming designers from underrepresented backgrounds? Lost in thought, he almost missed the figure hovering just outside the store. It was the young man from that morning, peering in somewhat hesitantly. Marcus waved him inside with a warm smile. I hope you're not here to return those wingtips, he joked as the man approached. They look pretty perfect on you. The customer, Marcus made a mental note to ask his name this time, shook his head. No, sir, I actually came to thank you again, and, well, to apologize. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Apologize? For what? The young man shifted uncomfortably. For not speaking up more. For letting that woman's accusations rattle me. I should have been stronger. A wave of sympathy washed over Marcus. How many times had he swallowed his own anger, his own hurt, in the face of prejudice? How often had he second-guessed his reactions, wondering if he should have done more, said more? You have nothing to apologize for, Marcus said firmly. The fault lies entirely with her, not you. But I appreciate you coming back. I'm Marcus, by the way. I don't think we were properly introduced earlier. Jamal, the young man replied, extending his hand. As they shook, Marcus noticed the calluses on Jamal's palm, the quiet strength in his grip. So, Jamal, Marcus said, an idea taking shape. What do you do when you're not being accosted in shoe stores? A hint of a smile played at Jamal's lips. I'm actually a graphic designer. Just started my own firm a few months ago. Marcus's eyes lit up. Really? I've been thinking about revamping our marketing materials. Maybe adding some local flair to our window displays. Would you be interested in discussing a potential collaboration? Jamal's surprise quickly gave way to enthusiasm. As they chatted, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than just a business transaction. It was a chance to amplify voices that needed to be heard, to showcase talent that might otherwise be overlooked. As Jamal left with a promise to return with some preliminary sketches, Marcus locked up the store with a lighter heart. The day's ugliness hadn't disappeared, but he felt like he'd taken a small step towards something positive. Walking home in the gathering twilight, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a text from his mother. Where are you? We're all waiting. With a jolt, he remembered the family dinner. Between the morning's drama and his impromptu meeting with Jamal, it had completely slipped his mind. He quickened his pace, mind already racing ahead to the conversations he knew he needed to have. His family had always been his rock, his sounding board. Tonight, he'd share the day's events with them, seek their advice on how to move forward. As Marcus rounded the corner onto his street, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A car was idling across from his house, its headlights off. He squinted, trying to make out the driver, but the gathering darkness made it impossible. A chill ran down his spine as he approached his front door. Was he being paranoid, Or was there something sinister about that car's presence? The events of the day had left him on edge, more aware than ever of the undercurrents of tension in his community. Shaking off his unease, Marcus plastered on a smile and pushed open the door. The warm voices of his family washed over him, a comforting balm after the day's turmoil. But as he hugged his mother and ruffled his nephew's hair, a part of him remained distracted. What if the morning's confrontation was just the beginning? What if his stand against discrimination made him a target? And most unsettling of all, what if the prejudice he witnessed in his store ran deeper through his neighborhood than he ever realized? As his family ushered him towards the dining room, Marcus cast one last glance out the window. The mysterious car was gone, leaving only questions in its wake. He squared his shoulders, determined not to let fear overshadow the positive steps he'd taken today. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he faced them head-on. For his family, for his community, and for the legacy he was building, one pair of shoes at a time. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the store earlier than usual, his mind still buzzing from last night's family discussion. His sister, a local activist, had urged him to go public with what happened. His father, ever cautious, suggested a more measured approach. By the time he'd left, Marcus felt both energized and overwhelmed by the weight of his choices. As he unlocked the front door, a flash of white caught his eye. Taped to the window was a crudely printed flyer. "Keep our neighborhood safe. Report suspicious activity." Marcus's stomach churned as he tore it down, crumpling it in his fist. This was no coincidence. Inside, he found Aisha already at work, sorting through a new shipment. Her eyes widened at his expression. "What's wrong?" Marcus smoothed out the flyer, showing it to her. Aisha's face darkened. "I've seen these around," she admitted. "Didn't want to worry you, but they've been popping up more lately." A heavy silence fell between them. The outside world was creeping in, threatening the sanctuary they built. Marcus took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "We're not going to let this change us," he declared, more firmly than he felt. "If anything, it means we need to work harder to make this place a beacon of inclusivity." As the day progressed, Marcus found himself hyper-aware of every customer interaction. He watched for sideways glances, listened for coded language. Most people were as warm and friendly as always, but there was an undercurrent of tension he couldn't shake. Mid-afternoon, the bell chimed. Marcus looked up to see Jamal enter, portfolio in hand. The young designer's enthusiasm was infectious as he spread out his sketches, explaining his vision for modernizing the store's branding while honoring its history. "I was thinking we could showcase local landmarks," Jamal explained, pointing to a stylized skyline. "Mix the old with the new, you know? Show how the store's been part of the community's growth." Marcus nodded, impressed. But as they discussed colors and fonts, he couldn't help noticing the occasional curious glance from other customers. Were they simply interested in the designs, or was there something more to their scrutiny? His unease grew when he spotted a familiar face outside, the security guard from yesterday, pausing to peer in the window. The man quickly moved on, but the knot in Marcus's stomach tightened. Was he checking up on them? Keeping tabs? As Jamal gathered his sketches, clearly pleased with Marcus's positive feedback, the store owner made a split-second decision. "Listen," he said in a low voice, "I don't want to alarm you, but there's been some pushback since yesterday. Nothing major, just some underhanded stuff. If you're having second thoughts about working with us, I'd understand." Jamal's expression hardened, a flicker of something. Pain? Resignation? Crossing his face. "This isn't my first rodeo, Mr. Johnson," he said quietly. "If anything, it makes me want to do this even more. Show them we're not going anywhere." Marcus felt a surge of respect for the young man's resilience. They shook hands, sealing their partnership, both aware they were stepping into something bigger than a simple rebranding. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself jumping at every ring of the bell, every raised voice. He hated feeling this way, suspicious, on edge in his own store. When a well-dressed older woman he didn't recognize spent an unusually long time examining a pair of loafers, his paranoia kicked into overdrive. Was she really a customer, or someone sent to keep an eye on things? Just before closing, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off if you know what's good for you." His blood ran cold. How had they gotten his personal number? Aisha found him staring at the screen, his face pale. "Boss, you okay?" He showed her the message, watching her eyes widen in alarm. "That's it," she said firmly. "We're calling the police." Marcus hesitated. Part of him wanted to downplay it, to believe it was just an empty threat. But the larger part knew they couldn't ignore this escalation. As Aisha dialed, he found himself wondering how many other business owners in the area had faced similar intimidation. How many had given in to the pressure, choosing the path of least resistance? The responding officer was polite but frustratingly noncommittal. Without concrete evidence of a specific threat, there wasn't much they could do. As she left, promising to increase patrols in the area, Marcus felt a mix of relief and lingering unease. Locking up that night, he spotted another car across the street, different from yesterday's, but similarly ominous in its stillness. He quickened his pace, hyper-aware of every shadow. At home, Marcus poured himself a stiff drink, trying to quiet his racing thoughts. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years building his business, focusing on craftsmanship and customer service, largely insulated from the uglier aspects of the world outside. Now, in trying to take a stand, he painted a target on his back. His phone buzzed again, this time a message from Jamal. "Check your email. Sent over some revised designs. Let me know what you think." Despite everything, Marcus smiled. It was a small reminder that for every act of hate, there were people pushing back with creativity and determination. As he opened his laptop to look at Jamal's work, a plan began to form in Marcus's mind. If they wanted to intimidate him, to force him back into complacency, they had another thing coming. He'd shine a light on what was happening, not just to him, but to others in the community who'd been silenced for too long. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd reach out to other local business owners, start building a coalition. Maybe his sister's activist connections could help amplify their voices. It wouldn't be easy, and he knew there would be pushback. But sitting quietly, hoping the problem would go away on its own, was no longer an option. Marcus looked at the framed photo on his desk, his grandfather standing proudly in front of the original shoe store, a grand opening sign in the window. He'd faced his own battles in those early days, breaking down barriers in a time when black-owned businesses were far from welcome in this neighborhood. "We've come too far to back down now," Marcus murmured, raising his glass in a silent toast to his grandfather's memory. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it head-on. As he finally climbed into bed that night, exhaustion warring with determination, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something much bigger than himself. The coming days would test him in ways he'd never imagined, forcing him to confront not just the prejudices of others, but his own complacency and blind spots. Sleep was long in coming, his mind filled with swirling images, protest signs and polished wingtips, shadowy cars and Jamal's bright designs. Whatever tomorrow brought, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be quite the same again. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Marcus threw himself into action, determined to turn the tide against the shadowy forces threatening his business and community. He reached out to fellow shop owners, organized meetings, and started building a network of support. Some were hesitant, fearing retaliation, but others joined eagerly, sharing their own stories of discrimination and intimidation. Jamal's rebranding project became a symbol of their resistance. The young designer worked tirelessly, incorporating elements that celebrated the neighborhood's diverse history. As the new window displays took shape, featuring local artists and highlighting stories of immigrant-owned businesses, the store began to attract attention, both positive and negative. Foot traffic increased, with curious customers drawn in by the vibrant artwork and powerful messages. But so did the number of threatening phone calls and anonymous emails. Marcus installed security cameras and hired a part-time security guard, all while trying to maintain the welcoming atmosphere he'd always prided himself on. One morning, Marcus arrived to find the store's front window smashed, glass littering the sidewalk. His heart sank as he surveyed the damage, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of determination. Within hours, neighbors and fellow business owners had rallied around him, helping to clean up and offering words of support. As Marcus swept up the last of the glass, a familiar face appeared. It was the security guard from that first confrontation, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "I saw what happened," he said gruffly. "It ain't right. Listen, I've been thinking a lot since that day. I want to help, if you'll let me." Marcus studied the man's face, sensing genuine remorse and a desire to make amends. He nodded slowly, extending his hand. We could use all the allies we can get. The incident, far from deterring them, seemed to galvanize the community. Marcus's sister helped organize a peaceful protest march, drawing attention to the broader issues of discrimination in the area. Local news outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the challenges faced by minority-owned businesses. But as their movement gained traction, the opposition grew bolder. Flyers with thinly veiled racist messages began appearing more frequently. Cars with darkened windows cruised slowly past the store at all hours. Marcus found himself jumping at shadows, constantly looking over his shoulder. The stress began to take its toll. Late one night, as Marcus pored over the store's financials, trying to figure out how to cover the increased security costs, Aisha confronted him. "You can't keep going like this," she said gently. "You're running yourself into the ground." Marcus rubbed his tired eyes, knowing she was right but unsure how to step back. "If I slow down, they win," he argued weakly. Aisha shook her head. "If you burn out, they win. We need you in this for the long haul." Her words struck a chord. Marcus realized he'd been so focused on the fight that he lost sight of why he started this in the first place, to create a safe, welcoming space for everyone. He promised to delegate more, to take better care of himself. As tensions in the community continued to simmer, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. The mayor's office wanted to meet with him and other local business leaders to discuss the ongoing issues. It was a chance to bring their concerns directly to those in power, to push for real change. The night before the meeting, Marcus stayed late at the store, rehearsing his talking points. As he locked up, a car screeched to a halt beside him. Before he could react, two men jumped out, their faces obscured by hoodies. Marcus's heart raced as he backed away, fumbling for his phone, but the men made no move to approach him. Instead, one of them spoke, his voice low and menacing. "Last chance, Johnson. Back off, or things are gonna get a lot worse for you and your little friends." They sped off as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving Marcus shaken but more determined than ever. He knew he should report the incident, but a part of him worried it would overshadow tomorrow's important meeting. After a sleepless night, he decided to keep it to himself, at least for now. The next morning, Marcus dressed with care, selecting his grandfather's gold cufflinks for an extra boost of confidence. As he knotted his tie, he caught sight of his reflection, the dark circles under his eyes, the new lines etched around his mouth. This fight was aging him, but it was also revealing a strength he hadn't known he possessed. Aisha met him at the store, ready to hold down the fort during his absence. As they went over last-minute details, Marcus couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something in the air felt different, charged with an electricity he couldn't quite explain. "Be careful out there," Aisha said as he turned to leave, her voice tinged with worry. Marcus nodded, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Always am. We're going to make real change today. I can feel it." As he stepped outside, squinting in the bright morning sunlight, Marcus took a deep breath. Whatever happened at this meeting, he knew it would be a turning point, not just for him, but for the entire community. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders as he began the walk towards City Hall. Halfway there, Marcus noticed a group of people gathered on the corner, holding signs. His heart sank as he recognized some of the hateful slogans he'd seen on flyers. But as he drew closer, he realized there was a second group present, supporters, holding signs of their own, championing diversity and inclusion. The two factions faced off, tension crackling between them. Marcus hesitated, knowing he should probably avoid the conflict and continue on to his meeting. But as he watched, the shoving intensified, bodies pressing closer together. In that moment, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between the two groups. "Enough," he called out, his voice carrying over the din. All eyes turned to him, a hush falling over the crowd. In that fragile moment of silence, Marcus knew his next words could either diffuse the situation or cause it to explode. As Marcus stood between the two groups, heart pounding, he suddenly recognized a face in the crowd. It was the blonde woman from that fateful day in his store, her eyes wide with shock at seeing him. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Marcus saw something unexpected flicker across her features. Was it shame? Regret? Before he could process this, a commotion erupted at the edge of the gathering. Phones were raised, voices rising in alarm. Through the sea of bodies, Marcus caught glimpses of a familiar storefront, his own. His blood ran cold as he realized smoke was billowing from the windows of his beloved shoe store. Without thinking, Marcus pushed through the crowd, all thoughts of the meeting forgotten. As he ran, he dialed 911 with trembling fingers, praying that Aisha had gotten out safely. The few blocks to his store felt like miles, each step bringing fresh waves of panic and disbelief. As he rounded the corner, the full extent of the disaster came into view. Flames licked at the windows, dark smoke pouring into the sky. A crowd had gathered, held back by newly arrived police officers. Marcus scanned frantically for Aisha, relief washing over him as he spotted her soot-streaked face in the throng of onlookers. "Marcus," she cried, pushing past the officer to reach him. "I'm so sorry, it happened so fast. They threw something through the window, and then—" Her words were drowned out by the wail of approaching fire engines. As firefighters leaped into action, Marcus could only watch in horror as the business he poured his heart and soul into was consumed by flames. A hand touched his shoulder, and he turned to find Jamal standing beside him, eyes wide with shock. "I came as soon as I heard," the young designer said. "Man, I can't believe this. All our work." Marcus nodded numbly, his mind reeling. This was no random act of vandalism. The timing, the boldness of it. This was a direct attack, a message meant to destroy not just his livelihood, but the hope he'd been building in the community. As the firefighters battled the blaze, a police detective approached, notebook in hand. "Mr. Johnson, we're treating this as a potential hate crime. We'll need to ask you some questions." The word hate hung in the air, heavy and acrid as the smoke still billowing from his store. Marcus felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce, rising within him. He tried to take the high road, to fight this battle with dignity and perseverance. But now they crossed a line. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a text from the mayor's office, asking where he was, if he was still coming to the meeting. Marcus stared at the screen, a wild idea forming in his mind. He turned to Aisha and Jamal, a newfound determination in his eyes. "I need you two to handle things here," he said urgently. "Talk to the police, deal with the insurance company. Can you do that for me?" They nodded, confusion evident on their faces. "What are you going to do?" Aisha asked. Marcus squared his shoulders, a grim smile playing at his lips. "I'm going to that meeting, but not alone." As he turned to leave, he caught sight of the blonde woman from earlier, hovering at the edge of the crowd. Their eyes met again, and this time there was no mistaking the conflict on her face. Without thinking, Marcus strode towards her. "You wanted to see what suspicious activity looks like," he said, his voice low and intense. "Take a good look. This is what hate does. This is the result of the fear you helped spread." The woman flinched as if he'd struck her. I never meant," she stammered. "I don't care what you meant." Marcus cut her off. "What matters is what you do now. You want to make this right? Come with me." Before she could respond, Marcus was moving again, pulling out his phone. He fired off rapid texts to the other business owners he'd been working with, to his sister and her activist friends. "Meeting at City Hall. Now. Bring everyone." As he walked, his pace quickening with each step, Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him. The store could be rebuilt, the inventory replaced. What mattered now was seizing this moment, turning this act of destruction into a catalyst for real change. Behind him, a growing crowd began to form. Word spread quickly through social media and hurried phone calls. By the time Marcus reached the steps of City Hall, he was no longer alone. A sea of faces stretched out behind him, business owners and customers, longtime residents and new arrivals, people of all colors and creeds united in their determination to take a stand. And there, in the middle of it all, looking shell-shocked but resolute, was the blonde woman. She caught Marcus's eye and gave a small nod, as if to say, "I'm here. I'm listening." Marcus took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he faced the imposing doors of City Hall. This wasn't how he planned to make his case, but sometimes the most powerful statements arise from the ashes of adversity. As he reached for the handle, he felt the weight of his community behind him, their collective voice ready to be heard. Little did Marcus know, Another surprise awaited him inside those doors, one that would test his resolve, challenge his beliefs, and potentially change the course of his fight forever. As he stepped across the threshold, the true battle was only just beginning. Marcus strode into City Hall, the crowd flowing in behind him like a tide of determination. The startled receptionists barely had time to react before they filled the lobby, their voices rising in a chorus of shared purpose. As Marcus approached the front desk, a familiar face emerged from a nearby corridor, the mayor himself, drawn by the commotion. "Mr. Johnson," the mayor said, his tone a mixture of surprise and concern. "What's going on here? We were expecting you upstairs, not this." He gestured at the impromptu gathering. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Mr. Mayor, I apologize for the disruption, but circumstances have changed. My store was just firebombed, a direct attack on everything we've been fighting for. We can't keep this behind closed doors any longer." The mayor's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. Then, to Marcus's surprise, a look of resolve settled over the politician's features. "You're right," he said firmly. "Follow me." As they made their way to the main assembly hall, Marcus couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The mayor's quick acquiescence, the lack of pushback, it all seemed too easy. The assembly hall was already occupied, filled with city officials and business leaders. A hush fell over the room as Marcus and his supporters filed in. He recognized faces from the Chamber of Commerce, community leaders, and, his heart skipped a beat, the chief of police. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor announced, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "I believe we need to adjust our agenda for today. Mr. Johnson, the floor is yours." Marcus stepped forward, acutely aware of all eyes upon him. He began to speak, his voice growing stronger with each word. He told the story of his store, of the escalating threats, of the community's fight against discrimination. As he spoke, he saw heads nodding, expressions changing from skepticism to concern to outrage. When he finished, a clamor of voices rose, questions and demands flying. But before anyone could respond, the police chief stood up, raising his hands for silence. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his face grave, "I owe you an apology. We've been investigating a series of hate crimes in the area, but we had no idea of the full scope until now. The truth is, we've uncovered evidence linking these incidents to someone in this very room." A collective gasp went up. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Could it be? Had they finally uncovered the mastermind behind all this? The chief's next words hit like a thunderbolt. "Mayor Thompson, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us." The room erupted in chaos. The mayor, his face ashen, began to protest, but the evidence presented by the chief was damning. Financial records showing payoffs to known hate groups. Encrypted emails coordinating the attacks on minority-owned businesses. A systematic attempt to drive out undesirables and gentrify the neighborhood for personal gain. As the mayor was led away in handcuffs, Marcus stood rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. The very man who had seemed to champion their cause had been working against them all along. In the stunned silence that followed, an unexpected voice spoke up. It was the blonde woman from the store, her voice shaking but determined. "I want to make a statement," she said. "I was part of this. Not the attacks, but I spread the rumors. I believed the lies. I'm here to take responsibility and to help make things right." Her words seemed to break a dam. Suddenly, people were standing up all around the room. Business owners, community leaders, everyday citizens. Each had a story to share, a piece of the puzzle that had been hidden for too long. As Marcus listened, he felt a profound shift taking place. The walls of mistrust and fear that had divided the community for so long were crumbling before his eyes. In their place, a new foundation of understanding and shared purpose was emerging. The next few hours passed in a blur of testimonies, promises of action, and the beginnings of real, tangible plans for change. By the time Marcus left City Hall, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. Aisha and Jamal were waiting for him at the bottom of the steps, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and elation. "You're not going to believe this," Aisha said, holding up her phone. "People have started a crowdfunding campaign for the store. We've already raised enough to cover the repairs and then some." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. After everything that had happened, this outpouring of support was almost overwhelming. But as he looked out at the diverse faces of his community, he realized that the store had become something more than just a business. It was a symbol of resilience, of the power of standing together against hate. As they walked back towards the burned-out shell of the shop, Marcus's mind was already racing with plans. They would rebuild, yes, but bigger and better than before. The new store would be a community hub, a place where people from all walks of life could come together, share their stories, and work towards a better future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still hearts and minds to change, systems to reform. But for the first time in months, Marcus felt a genuine sense of hope. They had faced the darkness head-on and emerged stronger for it. As they reached the store, Marcus paused, taking in the scene. The acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air, but there was something else too, the sweet scent of fresh flowers. Someone had placed a bouquet among the rubble, a small card nestled among the blooms. Marcus bent to read it, a smile spreading across his face as he recognized the handwriting. It was from the security guard who had caused so much trouble that first day. The message was simple, but powerful. "I'm sorry. Thank you for teaching me to see differently. How can I help rebuild?" Standing there, surrounded by the physical remnants of hate, but buoyed by the intangible strength of a community united, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The real work, the vital, transformative work of building a truly inclusive society, was only just beginning. And he was ready for it, one step at a time. In the weeks that followed, the community rallied around Marcus and his vision for rebuilding. The burned-out shell of his store became a symbol of resilience, drawing volunteers from all corners of the neighborhood. People who had never spoken to each other before found themselves working side by side, sharing stories, and forming unexpected friendships. Jamal's designs took center stage, transforming the space into something truly special. The new storefront featured a mural celebrating the area's diverse history, with portraits of local heroes and everyday residents intertwined with images of classic shoe styles. Inside, the layout was open and inviting, with comfortable seating areas where people could gather and chat. As the grand reopening approached, Marcus found himself busier than ever. But it was a different kind of busy, energizing rather than draining. He was no longer fighting alone, but part of a movement that was changing hearts and minds throughout the city. The blonde woman, whose name Marcus learned was Sarah, became an unlikely ally. Driven by remorse for her past actions, she threw herself into volunteer work, organizing community dialogues and using her connections to bring more people into the fold. Her journey from prejudice to understanding became a powerful example of the change they were working towards. The security guard, Tom, made good on his offer to help. He not only pitched in with the physical labor of rebuilding, but also became a bridge between the community and the local police force. His honest conversations about his own biases and learning process helped open doors that had long been closed. On the morning of the reopening, Marcus stood outside the store, taking it all in. A freshly painted sign gleamed in the sunlight, proudly proclaiming Johnson's Shoes, where every step counts. A line of eager customers stretched down the block, their excited chatter filling the air. As he prepared to cut the ribbon, Marcus looked out at the gathered crowd. There was Aisha, beaming with pride, and Jamal, nervously adjusting his tie. Sarah stood near the back, offering an encouraging smile. Tom was there too, in his off-duty clothes, chatting easily with a group of young people. Marcus cleared his throat, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. "Thank you all for being here today," he began. "A few months ago, I stood in this very spot, watching my family's legacy go up in flames. I thought it was the end of everything we worked for. But today, I realize it was just the beginning." He paused, looking at the faces before him, a beautiful tapestry of cultures, ages, and backgrounds. This store isn't just about selling shoes anymore. It's about building bridges, one step at a time. It's about recognizing that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. And it's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. As Marcus cut the ribbon, cheers erupted from the crowd. People streamed into the store, exclaiming over the beautiful design and the expanded selection of shoes. But what struck Marcus most was the way they interacted with each other. Strangers striking up conversations, kids from different backgrounds playing together in the children's section, elderly customers being helped by eager young volunteers. Throughout the day, Marcus found himself pulled into countless conversations. He heard stories of change, of neighbors reaching out to each other for the first time. He listened as people shared their hopes for the future and their commitment to keeping the momentum going. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the store's windows, Marcus finally had a moment to himself. He retreated to his office, a space that now doubled as a community meeting room, and sank into his chair with a contented sigh. A knock at the door roused him from his thoughts. It was Aisha, holding a small package. "This came for you earlier," she said, handing it over. "I think you'll want to see it." Marcus opened the package, curious. Inside was a single shoe, old and well-worn, but lovingly polished. A note was tucked inside. "Dear Mr. Johnson, this was the first pair of shoes I ever bought with my own money, from your grandfather's store. I've held onto it all these years as a reminder of where I came from and how far I've come. I think it belongs here now, as part of your new beginning. Thank you for reminding us all what community really means. An old friend." Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He placed the shoe carefully on his desk, a tangible link between past and present. As he left the store that night, locking up behind him, Marcus paused to look up and down the street. The neighborhood felt different now, more alive, more connected. He knew there was still work to be done, battles to be fought. But for the first time in a long time, he felt truly hopeful about the future. In the months that followed, Johnson's Shoes became more than just a business. It was a community hub, hosting everything from ESL classes to job fairs to cultural celebrations. The story of its rebirth spread, inspiring similar movements in other neighborhoods and cities. Marcus found himself increasingly called upon to speak at events, sharing his experiences and insights. He never sugarcoated the challenges they faced, but always emphasized the power of perseverance and unity. 1 year after the reopening, Marcus stood before a packed crowd at a national conference on community revitalization. As he looked out at the sea of faces, community leaders, business owners, activists, and politicians from across the country, he felt a profound sense of responsibility. "Our story isn't unique," he told them. "In every community, there are people working to bridge divides, to fight discrimination, to create spaces where everyone feels welcome. The key is to recognize that we're all in this together. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen alone. It takes all of us, stepping up, speaking out, and sometimes just listening." As he concluded his speech, the applause was thunderous. But what meant even more to Marcus were the conversations that followed. People sharing their own stories, asking for advice, forming connections that would lead to real change in their own communities. That night, as Marcus packed up his things in his hotel room, his phone buzzed with a text from Aisha. It was a photo of the store, where a group of teenagers, a mix of races and backgrounds, were gathered on the front steps, laughing together. The caption read, "Just another Tuesday night at Johnson's. You're missing all the fun." Marcus smiled, his heart full. This was what it was all about, not just selling shoes, but creating a space where people could come together, where barriers could be broken down, where a community could heal and grow stronger. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus found himself thinking of his grandfather, of all the sacrifices and struggles that had led to this moment. He hoped that wherever he was proud of what they built, not just a successful business, but a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of standing together in the face of hate. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more hearts and minds to change. But Marcus was ready for it all, knowing that he wasn't walking alone. With every step, they were moving forward together, towards a future where everyone could stand tall, proud of who they were and where they came from. And that, Marcus realized, was the most comfortable fit of all.